yourself further. Thanks.
Great, and thanks so much, Allison. It's really wonderful to be part of this conference and part of this panel. I am serving as interim director for the Citizen Science Association based in the US, but the work that I'm going to talk about today is work I have done through my affiliation with Cornell University. And what I hope to do through this presentation is open up a conversation about what it really takes system-wide to do citizen science that meets the standards of working towards policies and policy change, particularly in management contexts. And I have a particular interest in conservation management, so that's what you will hear mostly about today. As more and more literature has supported and pointed towards, citizen science offers a really wonderful opportunity space for affecting change in relationship to policies and in resource management. In the US, there is a need for more best available information. That's the term that's used here in the US, so more data on which to make decisions. There's also potential for developing shared understandings to inform policies, both with data and through other channels. The publication posted here is also linked at the end, so no worries about trying to capture all of that small text. I will be glad to share these resources. The big question, though, for a lot of agencies who are looking at citizen science is how to really affect this change. What is the system-wide support that is necessary to set appropriately high expectations for citizen science that meets relevant expectations for the agencies, and also what's necessary to support that? Cases have needed to be made, and I've been hearing from a number of people arguments needing to be made to administrators and agencies for having investment in supporting citizen science that we know can meet those expectations, and an understanding of the costs and values associated with that. So it's with this in mind that I worked along with Rick Bonney in the context of the US Fish and Wildlife Service to undertake a question of what it would take to support citizen science within that particular agency. And along with Rick, and under the direction of Jana Newman at the Fish and Wildlife Service, we did a review of other frameworks, what other people in the landscape were saying about the best practices and how to really turn best practices into action. So this is the synthesis of that review, basically saying that there are 7 things that are needed to be attended to support any one project. And those things are pictured here, thinking throughout the system about participant engagement and sustainability, and then looking to make sure you're identifying goals, designing and refining the project, and so forth. But of course, when you ask, what does it mean to identify goals and how do we do those things, we have to expand this out to a much bigger picture. And that's what I'm going to show you now. And it's complex. And that is the point, really, that there is a lot to think about in supporting any one project or a set of projects that meet the goals that are set by an agency. And I don't want you to have to absorb all of this right now. The big question is really looking at this and how much is involved. How do you attend to all of these things? And what does it look like if you try to do that? And I'm going to walk you through a case study of a different agency, a subset of an agency that has done just that. And this is where I start to talk about infrastructure. So Rick and I took this framework and were invited to work with the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council, which is a unit within the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, that is tasked with collaborative stakeholder management of fisheries all throughout the US Southeast. And this is offshore fisheries and a very mixed group of fisheries that include recreational fishermen as well as commercial fishermen and a whole mix in between. So in addition to having a really diverse fishing constituency, this particular council in this particular region has a lot of species to manage. It's a really diverse system. Over 80 species, I believe, are managed within this system. And the combination of the number of species and the complexity of the ecology within that, as well as the limitation of the scientists available to look at what's happening over time, there's a real limitation of the data available to make good management choices. But there was also a real recognition that fishermen are out there all the time. They know the system incredibly well and have practical and relevant knowledge to share. And so the council set out to explore citizen science as a means to do data with better information, more information to inform decisions. And long story short, the council started by convening around 60 people. And again, this is a diverse stakeholder group, sat them down in a room for 3 days to look at all of the things that Rick and I were saying needed to happen and decide what needed to happen in their setting and in their context. And again, long story short, they ended those 3 days with a mission and a vision to do better science, better fishing, and better management by producing more data through citizen science. And although their vision and mission have changed from that original meeting, their vision and mission both still point towards better data and better information through citizen science for fisheries management. And that's a big task. What they set out to do right out of the gate was determined that they were not going to start a project. They were not going to undertake an individual citizen science effort to collect data because they wanted to be sure, with everyone invested in this prospect, that they were prepared for an initial project that was set up to succeed. There was a lot of trust being developed throughout this process. Relationships being built, and a lot of weight hanging on fishermen investing their efforts in the prospect of collecting data that would actually be used. And instead of starting a project, what they did set out to do was start a program. And this is an effort to build the scaffolding and the structures and the rules of engagement to make sure that the data produced would be done with rigor in the development of the projects and the data that subsequently would result. And the fisheries management process does have very strict requirements of the types of data that can be used in the decision-making process. So it was incredibly important that everybody's efforts were focused on rigorous data as a result. I do want to point out that the rigor was not just in regards to the data, but to the entire process of developing a project. And I want to get into a little bit of those details here. But first, I want to paint a picture of how they approached a program, because just like the fisheries management that they do, the council set up a multi-stakeholder team to tackle the development of this project. And although there's a lot of complexity to the diagram, I want to draw your attention just to the volunteer action teams that were defined to move this effort forward. And these were 5 teams focused on everything from data management to working with volunteers and communicating about projects, to financing the efforts that would result, really looking to the long term and to the sustainability of these collaborations over time. At this point, I'm going to point out the work that each of these teams did towards those categories that Rick and I had defined as important for appropriately supporting citizen science projects. And again, here is that grid, and there's a lot to talk about there, but the point that I want you to take away is that the work of each of those volunteer teams, and they're color-coded here, accounted for all of these categories. And this was informed by Rick and myself, but it wasn't prescriptive. So essentially, each of these teams self-identified to do work that accounted for all of these areas that are necessary to support citizen science. The open circles show that they talked about that area as important. The closed circles indicates that they developed products that specifically support that area of work. And I'm going to tell you what that actually looks like. The end of the early phase of this work, so the conclusion of these action teams' efforts, which spanned over a year, was the production of a manual of standard operating policies and procedures for any citizen science projects that would be developed within the council. And this procedures manual includes tools that can be used by the program as a whole and by individual projects to ensure that critical areas are attended to. And this includes things like a process for prioritizing the projects and the research areas that get suggested and pursued. It includes a process for endorsing a project, reviewing and saying that, yes, it meets the criteria of the council. Standards for doing things like acknowledging volunteers and for training volunteers, requirements for the data that are produced, and even a plan for developing partnerships with other agencies and stakeholders who are involved in this. And all of these contents are online. Again, I will share this presentation so you can have these links. There's a lot more in here. This is just a selection of things that they've done, but together, all of these things constitute what the council talks about as a program, and what I talk about as well as infrastructure, the pieces that then will support subsequent projects moving forward. The council has developed 2 projects, and these are underway in various phases. I think they even have a 3rd in the works now. They're very different in nature. One is an on-the-water app-based project for fishermen to report fish that are released. It started with one species and now is being adopted by others for looking at other fisheries. The other is an online project that is inviting anyone to classify images of historic fish catches to look at the catch indication of fish species change over time, if that can be seen, and that's on the Zooniverse platform. So they are moving forward to put this program into action. And the synthesis, the so what, the takeaway of this from the perspective of the council, again, as a subset of one management agency, is that the investment it took was the funds to support the workshop for 60 people and 1 full-time staff person devoted to this work over time. What they've gotten back out of that is the really dedicated work of 45 volunteers, equating to over $50,000 US of volunteer time, hundreds of pages of templates and manuals that projects can put into use, and now these projects moving forward. The takeaways that I'd like to suggest for other resource agencies is that there is vast potential in investing in system-wide infrastructure that attends to the unique needs within a context. So what is necessary to support the infrastructure within a given agency, a given management agency. And that will, of course, look different from agency to agency. In the US, it's taking shape in different ways. And although this is the only case that I know of comprehensive review of infrastructure, agencies like the US Environmental Protection Agency has put in place policies for overcoming other restrictive policies like the US Paperwork Reduction Act that can stand in the way of working with volunteers. The US Forest Service has developed a toolkit and a mini grant program, and NOAA-wide, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, has just released and closed public comment period on a statement describing what citizen science can and should look like within the agency. So the real takeaway I'd like to leave all of us with is that the development of infrastructure is an investment in the future of citizen science within a context. And I would like to invite each of us to think about the value of that investment, not just the cost, but what we can do now to support citizen science into the long term. And with that, I will leave you with some thanks to many, many folks and some resources, again, that I will share. And I will turn it back over to Allison to transition us to the next.